lesson in all of this, I suppose, but I digress. My father enjoyed hard work, particularly outside in the freedom of nature and the yard. He was a measure once, cut twice type of person. So the hard work sometimes came naturally, as if a tree fell the wrong way or he found himself tiled into a corner. But he always Juri digged himself out of it, and he never gave up. We have the crooked tiles to prove it. My father and mother were truly blessed with grandchildren, and it was a joy for them to teach a new generation and give them a jump on experiencing the world. My wife, Kat, jokingly said, and I agreed, that we were chopped chicken liver once the grandkids arrived. My father would read to them, bounce them on his knee, make them breakfast, crepes, fruit, yogurt, and hardly ever raised a fuss when they banged out a tune on the piano or ran around like loons. That was my children, come to think of it. So now I understand why my father was content that day. It is rare for a person to understand their purpose in life. But my father knew and achieved his. He was a man who had lost everything, and together with my mother, had built it back and more. He had a home and a loving home and a loving family that he cared deeply about. He had prepared his children to take on the world. I cannot impress upon you how much he is loved and is.
Thank you, Father. And last, I'd like to ask his other son, Tor, to share some of your opinions of your dad. Thank you.
Some of this you've already heard from people who have shared, but I will perhaps have just a different take on it. As children, we had a very full life because my father served in the Army. We were able to visit most of the U.S. and sample the best and sometimes the worst of every military base we were assigned to, and of course we would drive everywhere. From Fort Knox, Kentucky, we would drive to Indianapolis for the Estonian Lutheran Church service. We drove to Baltimore for the Estonian Festival, and then to Canada for Muskoka Camp, which is in the northern wilds. And then back down to Toronto for the Esto, and of course Lakewood, New Jersey for all the scouting adventures, which you've already heard about, and drive everywhere we did. And sometimes we had additional passengers. My father and Uncle Matt built a platform into the back of the van for us to sleep on, and a side shelf for my mother's orchids, which traveled with us one Christmas drive. I remember carting the orchids into a roadside motel. There was a snowstorm that was too dangerous to continue on, but we had to stop. And yes, the tender orchids were tended to, though I'm sure my father grumbled at the notion. But he soldiered on in his usual steadfast way, tolerating sometimes the unusual request because it was important to someone else. As my father said, and this is how we were to lay in the van, so to speak, the direction of any van trip was feet to the rear, because new legs are to be had, and heads to the front, because new brains were not. My father was quietly very smart. We had several high-ranking Estonian officers, Army officers, tell my father that he needed to speak English with his children, that we needed to blend in more. But my father was not about to change who he basically was, and you, our guests, are living proof that tolerance works. America welcomed my parents and grandparents, and hard work, higher education has allowed us to succeed. My father was actually very useful in the military. He was able to liaison with visiting foreign officers, and he was constantly spreading the historical time frame that he himself lived through. Our duality has been interesting and added so much to our everyday lives. And when my father retired, he was able to step back into the Estonian organizations that still flourished. And again, you've heard about some of that. And I have to switch to Estonian for 1 second here. Muuseas, nimetan teie 1950s Willimantic elanikudele, et Mal Timmusk, kes ei saanud kohale tulla täna, koostas fotoalbumi teie tegevustest, mis on sõjaväelaua kõrval, nii et palun soorige seda. There's a album that's on the military desk there from the 1950s that has been put together by Malte Musk. So some of you who have seen or lived through it can enjoy, and others can take a look and just see what life was back in the 1950s, perhaps. But anyway, yes, when he retired, we were able to step back in. We attended Estonian school on alternate Saturdays. We hated going in the morning, but we did it anyway. And thanks to Leelo Ninask, we were actually able to learn Estonian folk dancing and actually perform at the Estos, and even Kelker and Rutger, two of my father's grandsons, were able to perform at the last San Francisco Esto. So all of this is really just a way of saying that maintaining our heritage was an important pillar for my father, as it defined who he was as a person, a husband, a parent, and grandparent. I'd like to thank Reverend Marcus Vaga for the service and Lena Gueva for the accompaniment. I'd also like to thank the United States military for their military services. And I'm sure that you'll be delighted with the repast that Lizzie has prepared for us. For 30 years, she's been working here at UConn, and students and faculty alike wait for her wonderful food combinations. And I want to thank all of you for traveling here during these pandemic times to speed my father's trip into orbit, as my mother keeps calling the obit, perhaps metaphorically.
Thank you. And then lastly, I'd ask out there if you would like to say a few words, Juri's grandson, please.
So, I do have to apologize, as somewhat force of habit, we often switch between both English and Estonian. We'll start a sentence in one language and then quickly transfer to the other, and then stare confusedly as to why you didn't understand the Estonian portion of it, because quite clearly it was easy to follow. However, you truly do need to ask. Just nudge the person next to you. You may find someone who does understand. We were quite lucky to have Manaisa here for all of growing up. Rutger and I, each morning, would get breakfast, quite large, 3-course always, because as a line chef he knew what he was doing with his eggs. Always either an omelet or a fried, and you would specify and he'd say, well done. And each morning we would walk through the woods over to school, then come back, and after school he would have food waiting for you. And this would be done every day. Sorry. And the best part was that he was always willing to go the little extra mile for you. In winter time, when it was waist high or even knee high snow, he would take the snow plow or the snow blower out back and plow a small little portion for us, which I know is a luxury that only my brother and I got to experience instead of Gorm, Eli, Karo, and Gia. He was a wonderful teacher. He always taught many life skills that I still use today. Using a chainsaw, chopping wood, how to stack wood, what's the appropriate way to burn and which wood burns best. Toi alati üks sordimees, kes kui sa tegi midagi valesti, ütleks sinule seda ja siis õpetaks sinule, kuidas teha ta paremalt. Ja ta jaatis, et lihtsalt ütlemas, kuidas teha ei olnud alati üks kerge asi, ta näitaks sulle ka. Ja ma olen tänulik, et mina sain saada seda. Tema ja mina alati, kuna lund tuli, ta oleks mina ja tema, kes oleks väljas külfedamas ja mõnikord Rutger sai tulla aitada ka, kelle me viskaks lund tema peale. Selle kattus, selle garaaži peal oli kõige raskem osad, sest sa vajasid minna üles räduliga, aga alati oleks ühed meid hoidmas alus ja teine läheks üles ja siis teine tuleks. Ja need oli kõige paremad, sest tavaliselt meil oli küllalt palju lund, sa viskaks ühe poole pealt ära ja peale sa oled valmis, sa hüppaks katus pealt ära ja laanduks lumesse. And because of his time as a teacher, I believe it is why he always enforced and instilled a true desire to always educate yourself and to, in essence, do your best to learn something every day. And he would take every opportunity he could to bring in history or some bizarre or outlandish fact that was somehow related to the moment. But the best things were the many travels Rucker and I and everyone got to experience with him, for he was probably the most tolerable travel partner one could have. The best vacations were the many trips we had to Estonia, where you could truly see that he felt natural and at home in a land that he was forced out of, and was excited and happy to show his grandkids where he was from and where, in essence, we came from. Ja kõige parem osad kah oleks, et sõitmas tee peale me saaks peatada kus iganes ja seal oleks väike kalamaja just tee ääre peal ja me ostaks suitutatud kala ja ütleks, et sa joh, proovi. Ja me sööks seal ja sööks lõuna. Ja kõige armsam oma oli meie viimane oma, kus kõige rohkem meist saime minna mamsi sünnipäeva jaoks. Ja oli selle loši päeva ja oli kõige, ma usun, ilusam sünnipäev, mis meil oli sinuga. Ja kõiki meid saime kõike tuua seal. Toi, ma usun, teile kõik meist kõige õnnelikum, kuna mina sain minna koolisse Eestis. Ja oli nii uhke, et olin minemas tagasi. Vabandan. Ja ma tean, et tema kõige, kuna mina olin koolis, tema läks karu ka ja Rocky ka selle Black River, upstate New York's, the little house outside there, or the cabin. And Rucker was the only one who was able to catch a fish the entire trip. And he was so happy that any one of us was able to catch a fish, that he almost tripped down the hill running towards him, and nearly gutted it on the spot and cooked it. As that's who he was. He was a man of simply doing and knowing that with hard work and education you will progress, and I'm incredibly lucky that he instilled that into both me and my brother, and that we were able to know him and live with him for a good deal of our lives. I'm saddened that he is gone, but know that whenever I visit here, I can visit him here and talk with him, and know that although things may seem hectic now, all will be right, and that he taught me the skills necessary to get through life, and that I'm thankful for that.
This concludes our service here, but as Storm said, there is a repast bayet that follows in the best of Estonian traditions. So please enjoy, please share your stories and your memories about Juri and keep his memory alive through all of these gatherings. On behalf of the family, I want to thank everyone for coming out today and spending time together. Thank you.
Oh ja? Dus dan let we zitten. Ja, gewoon ja, ik ben net aan de boord. Dan let we